Here we are at the most controversial game in the entire series. A game that everybody has an opinion about, but they're all strongly opinionated on one side or the other. No one ever says it's just okay. They either passionately hate it and think it ruined the series for years to come thanks to its very action-y tone, or it's the greatest game in the entire series. And there's actually a couple reasons why. So why don't we just burrow deep into Resident Evil 5 like we're a parasite shoved down a poor unsuspecting man's gullet. Didn't like that one? Me either. Roll the thing.
Resident Evil 5.
Before the game we got today, the original version of Resident Evil 5 still featured Chris Redfield, but instead he drove around fighting zombie crime in a talking car, kind of like Knight Rider. That's actually not true at all, I entirely made that up, but it's a pretty sweet pitch for Resident Evil 9, so Capcom, give me a call. Yeah, actually the development of Resident Evil 5 was fairly standard and simple. Most of the changes throughout development were story things until the biggest change came when they decided to turn it into a co-op game. But there was no scrapping of 4 different versions that turned into multiple games. It was, however, the first game of a new hardware generation, and that comes with some issues of its own. It also came at a very interesting time, and it's a game that is very much of that time. The 7th generation of consoles, the Xbox 360, and the PlayStation 3. The HD generation, the first generation to fully integrate online connectivity, but mostly it was a generation that had a very specific feel. If you go back and play 90% of the games from this generation, you'll know exactly what time frame they came from. Of course, there is the Halos and the Modern Warfares, the Mass Effects. Those are these timeless classics that changed up the format we were used to getting at the time. But I'm talking about stuff like Bulletstorm, Uncharted, Gears of War, Army of Two. All of these games feel like the 7th generation. Short, well-polished, kind of gray and brown, linear AAA games. And Resident Evil 5 fits right in there with those. Taking place 11 years after the Raccoon City incident, which would be 5 years after 4, but this series only measures time in BRC and ARC, before and after Raccoon City. We pick up the story of Chris Redfield once again, who we haven't seen since Code Veronica. A now much older and buffer Chris, I should add. The dude pulled a Camille on us. Last thing we knew, he was just this skinny little nerdy looking guy. Then he suddenly shows up looking like this with his shirt sleeves trying their best to hold back his biceps like Spider-Man with that train.
Tell everyone to hang on!
We should make bridges out of whatever this shirt is made of. Those are about to burst. But I digress. Colossal Chris finds himself in Africa to investigate a possible bioorganic weapon, as he is now working for the BSAA, or the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance. The word assessment is entirely unnecessary there, but they didn't want people to get that confused with Chris's other acronym, BSA, Boulder Smashing Animal. Okay, that's the one. You get the one boulder joke for the video and that's it. For those of you who don't get that joke, just watch to the end of this, but know that there won't be any jokes about it when we get to the boulder. When he arrives, Chris is greeted by his partner for this mission, Sheva Almer, another member of the BSAA, but with 2 T's. Before they introduce her, they introduce her butt with 2 T's. Yeah, this game came out at the same era as those Hardee's commercials. I'm sorry, Carl's Jr. for those less fortunate. Also, games like Lollipop Chainsaw and Bayonetta. That's not a dig at those games, but we know what they are. I told you this was a game of its time. When the inevitable remake of 5 does roll around, this whole thing will end up being the Lewis situation all over again. It's just kind of stupid that they introduce her like this because it really takes away from how good of a character she is. She's one of my favorite one-time Resident Evil companions of all time. She's right up there with Steve. You didn't think we'd go this whole year without mentioning Steve, right? But after this is where we pick up the sticks for Resident Evil 5. And this game plays like almost exactly like the previous entry. It's fully 3D with the same semi-tank controls, the same type of stuck-in-place aiming allowing you to stun enemies to prompt melee attacks, which I'm just now realizing I left out of the 4 video. That's like 80% of my gameplay. My bad. But by far, the biggest change of this entire game is the introduction of cooperative multiplayer. The entire game can be played front to back with another player, along with all of the side modes being cooperative as well. This is something that the Resident Evil series has lost, that I really loved for this very, very short-lived era. I know I just did 20 minutes gushing about my love for Resident Evil 4 in the last one, but this game is very special to me too. The amount of memories I have playing this with my brother and friends for hours and hours, just running through the Mercenaries mode, all the time I've spent through the campaign over the years with multiple friends, even ones that didn't like Resident Evil. Shout out Josh. And a lot of the memories came before I even had a 7th generation console. I wouldn't get my Xbox 360 till the Christmas of 2009, nearly a full year after the release of 5. But I had friends who had it for their 360s and we would spend night after night playing it. And then I got older. I still return to it here and there a little with friends for their first time playing through or just for the nostalgia play, but it never became the yearly playthrough like Resident Evil 4. But it still holds this special place in time for me that I do like to revisit on occasion, and a large portion of that is due to the multiplayer aspect. Resident Evil has done a lot of runs at the multiplayer concept, the Outbreak games, the rail shooters. In recent years, those weird little pack-in downloadable only multiplayer games that came free with the mainline entry. You know, the ones you didn't want but they gave to you anyways. But none of them have ever really been successful like 5 was as an excellent multiplayer game. It's an excellent multiplayer campaign for couch and online, or an excellent arcade shooter if you're just playing Mercenaries to pick up and put down. And even the PvP game that I've never heard anyone complain about. I haven't heard him compliment it, but no one ever complains about it, so I feel like that's a win. This multiplayer style would continue into the next game before we never saw it again, but no one ever talks about how great of a game that is for its multiplayer. The multiplayer aspect also brought in a lot of new mechanics. Puzzles that involve 2 people doing the same thing different places, pulling levers or switches at the same time, similar to what we saw in 0, but something that required 2 people to actually do it. But the saddest thing of all is we've lost our dear, dear friend, the Case. Unfortunately, Capcom didn't think that the best part of their last game needed to make an appearance here. Why? I don't know, kinda dumb to me. Capcom, more like, not very good com.
You should have said Crapcom.
Hey! Shut up! But instead, our Case is now swapped out for 9 inventory slots. Nothing varies in size or shapes. Every single item counts as 1 inventory slot, which means you're gonna run out of space kind of often. But luckily this time our companion character is actually somewhat useful. You can now trade items between the 2 characters like Billy and Rebecca could, or you can use it to annoy your friends.
I need an egg.
Same applies to those doors that require both players to be at them at the same time to progress to the next section.
Come on, Sheva, hurry!
Okay.
Sheva, Sheva,
Okay.
Sheva, hurry!
Okay.
Come
Okay.
on, come on,
Okay.
Sheva, come on, Sheva, come on, come on!
Love doing that. Annoys them every time. Speaking of Billy and Rebecca, this game kind of expanded on what was built in 0, but it also takes some of the worst parts of it, especially if you're playing solo. It does the same thing of having 2 characters split into different directions or stay together, but in 0 all the time you're in control of both of them and could swap back and forth. Here you are stuck as the character you select for the entirety of the game, and I can't say that the AI character is ever all that useful when you can't get to something or get stuck because they're standing in the way. You are given 0 control over your partner outside of a few commands. I really like that feature of being able to move the other character with the right stick very easily. I'm never going to stop hoping for that to be in every single game with 2 characters. We also saw a change to a chapter-based level system introduced in 4 that I also didn't mention because it really didn't matter until right now. Because in that case, it's still just a linear game but broken up into chapters. But it matters now because this game features a chapter select. You're no longer confined to a linear playthrough of this game. In this game, you'll be playing through chapters, and once you've started a new one, you can select it immediately from the chapter select at any time. So at any point, if you need money or you missed a collectible, you won't have to play through the entirety of the game again to get to that point. You can just boot up whichever level you want to play through and play through it, and then return right back to where you were in the campaign without any issues. Personally, this makes it really easy for me to grab footage for certain parts of the game without having to record the entire playthrough. That's a lot of hard drive space, and I don't have a lot of that to go around. That's just kind of a personal thing for me, but I like games that have chapter selects way more than ones that don't. And as usual, we have a few new enemies, but not like a lot. And the basic ones are, I apologize for this, I never actually heard it said out loud. Magini, I think is how it's pronounced. But they are the exact same as the Ganados from Resident Evil 4, They can talk and use tools and weapons. This makes sense because they're infected with a mutated form of the Lost Plagas known as the Plaga Type 2. There's also executioners, Ouroboros monsters, along with a few variations on older enemies like the Liquor Beta. But to get into the story side of things, we actually need to go back to before the story, because for the first time ever in the series, this game had 2 DLC stories released for it, which at the time cost 400 Microsoft points. You remember that stupid point system they had? That's the only cryptocurrency I'm interested in. Tell me what the value on that is. I've had Microsoft points sitting in my account for years. They just converted those to regular dollars in your account. They did what? But the one that's important to the main story is Lost in Nightmares. This DLC takes place 3 years before the events of Resi 5 and follows Chris reunited with Jill for the first time since the very first game. They did that in a DLC. Jill, like Chris, is also working for the BSAA. This DLC opens with Chris and Jill invading the mansion of Umbrella founder Oswell E. Spencer. The BSAA had tracked down Spencer's whereabouts so they could use him to find Wesker. Luckily for them, Wesker is there at Oswell's home. Unluckily for them, Wesker is there murdering Oswell. So Chris and Jill try to fight Wesker and he absolutely rinses them because they brought 9mm handguns to a superpower fight. Remember when he was running on the walls? He teleports now. What is that about? While Wesker is distracted about to murder Chris, Jill tackles him through the window of the mansion that overlooks a cliff and they both fall to their deaths. 3 years after the events of Lost in Nightmares, we're back into the main game in Kajuju, Africa, where Chris is meeting up with Sheva, where they are given the task to meet up with BSAA Alpha Team and help them catch BOW smuggler Ricardo Irving. I just want to pull it back for just a minute. The opening to this game when you're just walking down the street, unbelievably atmospheric. I love it. It's such a cool slow open to the game. Shortly after they arrive, they're soon attacked by some infected locals, and after escaping them, they find the last surviving member of Alpha Team. But not for long, because Captain DeCant gives them a flash drive and then dies. They then get attacked by a giant worm monster known as the Ouroboros monster, which, if we watch the last video, is what became of the fog idea from that version of Resident Evil 4. Pretty cool, they're connecting together here. If you haven't seen it, watch that video. It's pretty good. I'm in it. They realize pretty fast that their weapons do absolutely nothing to this monster, so they try luring it into an incinerator and burning it to death. Which works because the weakness to Ouroboros is fire. It's like a Pokemon. They don't put much work into that. They then send the files from the flash drive to the BSAA. They then try to escape the city but get chased by Magini. We're just going to say infected from now on. But they get saved by Delta Team led by Josh Stone. And after they're safe, Josh reveals that he thinks Jill Valentine may be alive and working for Ricardo Irving, even though she's been presumed dead for 3 years. Chris and Sheva eventually track down Irving, but they're attacked by a masked figure, and Irving escapes. They then travel by way of Jeep Gun to try to meet up with Delta Team, who have unfortunately all been murdered, except for Josh, by an El Gigante. You know, from Resident Evil 4, big guy. It's called something different here, but it's never not going to be El Gigante to me. The BSAA then ends the mission and orders Chris and Sheva to return to HQ, but Chris refuses because if Jill is still alive, he has to save her. So Sheva, as a good partner, agrees to help him, and Chris and Sheva fight their way through a swamp filled with a bunch of small villages. They find out another pharmaceutical company called Tricell has spread the virus through the village by telling the people that it's a cure for a disease that doesn't even exist. They fabricated an entire disease and then turned them into mind control zombies. They do catch up with Irving, but he refuses to be arrested and instead injects himself with a virus, turning him into a giant monster thing. But once Chris and Sheva defeat him, Irving tells them that the head of Tricell, Exhilarating, is who was behind the plan to infect everyone. After that, Chris and Sheva travel through nearby ruins till they come face to face with the masked figure again. And also Wesker. And finally, the masked woman is revealed that she is none other than Jill Valentine. Bet you completely expected that one, huh? That's why we started with Lost in Nightmares. Wesker then escapes as usual and they have to fight Jill, until it's revealed that she has an implant in her chest, injecting her with constant mind-controlling drugs. There it is. That's the Resident Evil wackiness we were looking for. Glad that finally came in. It's a little far in for that, right? Like, there was some real weird stuff, but that's where the wackiness is at. They are eventually able to remove it, but Jill is now weak from fighting them and a massive drug withdrawal. So she tells Chris and Sheva to go after Wesker, and she escapes with the help of Josh Stone, which is what is covered in the Desperate Escapes DLC. And it's entirely unnecessary to tell you the story of that, because it's just them escaping. They do manage to track down Wesker and Excella, who has been infected with the Ouroboros, you know, the big worm monster thing. And Wesker tries to escape again, while they fight the Ouroboros monster. Jill then radios in to tell Chris that Wesker does have a weakness, and it happens to just so be a vial that Excella dropped while they were following her. So they chase Wesker onto this plane that he's planning to drop bombs from containing the Ouroboros virus, and then they have one of the coolest fights ever and inject Wesker with the drug.
Your feeble attempts only delay the inevitable. The entire world will be infected.
Just another one of Umbrella's leftovers.
With Wesker weak, they're able to push him out of the plane into a volcano, and he almost takes Sheva with him, but without the plane having a pilot, it crashes into the volcano as well. Where Wesker is still alive, shouldn't be surprised by that. He then takes the Ouroboros virus himself to make him like triple virused up and super strong, and they have to fight him in the volcano. Chris and Sheva do end up getting separated during this fight, and Chris has to punch a boulder out of the way to get to her. There it is. I told you. No more jokes about the stupid boulder. They're able to knock him into the lava and try to escape on a BSAA helicopter, but Wesker is still alive after being in the lava until the Resident Evil staple comes out, a rocket launcher.
Ready, partner?
Locked and loaded.
Suck on this, Wesker.
Your time's up, you son of a bitch.
And they blow him up, finally killing the series' main villain after 6 mainline entries. They could have used a rocket launcher the entire time. They've used like 50 of them throughout the series. But that is Resident Evil 5. A game that I have literally nothing else to say about it. I know it doesn't make any sense. It was like the best-selling entry in the entire series for a long time. Possibly even Capcom's best-selling game for a long time. But people still hate it. A lot of people hate it. I love it, which is usually the way it goes on this channel. And if you're into that kind of thing, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, leave a comment under it, and then... Hey, me from the editing chair. So here's the thing. October was very long, but not long enough at the same time. I originally planned to do Resident Evil 0, 4, 5, and 6 this year, but I got quite behind on it trying to get all these things done with a lot of other things going on in my life that you could hear about if you tune in on the streams Thursday nights at 9 p.m. Central. So instead, I'm going to push Resident Evil 6 to next year. Resident Evil 6 is a massive game, and I don't think it would do any justice to it for me to rush a video out on it. So this is the official end of RE Ween 2024. Thank you for watching. It means the world to me, just like all of these games do. I'm glad you could celebrate them with me this year, and I look forward to celebrating 6, 7, and 8 with you next year. So subscribe so you can see when that comes out. Maybe leave a comment about how great 5 is. I don't have a script here. I'm just doing this off the top of my head. Go play Resident Evil 5.